Buongiorno a tutti quanti, benvenuti, diamo un po' di tempo a tutti quanti di collegarsi. Hello to everybody, welcome to everybody. Let's just give some minutes to everybody to join this webinar, and we will then start with our meeting this afternoon. Allora, buongiorno a tutti quanti, comincio a dare delle indicazioni intanto in italiano. Allora, per sentire, diciamo, per ascoltare questo webinar in italiano dovete in fondo al plugin di Zoom selezionare la lingua francese. Non ce ne vogliate, ma purtroppo l'opzione lingua italiana non funzionava, non c'era, quindi dovete mettere la lingua francese. Vi garantisco che però vi verrà tradotto tutto quanto in italiano, quindi non abbiate timore al riguardo. Ora passerò alla lingua inglese, quindi sentirete la mia voce tradotta, ma insomma avrete così modo di partecipare e di sentire bene tutto quanti i diversi interventi. So welcome to everybody. You will see that there are several languages optional, and please, if you are English speaking, choose the English as a language. While if you are Italian, please choose the French language, and you will hear everything in Italian. So let's start with the introductions. I'm just a quick brief presentation about me. I'm Andrea Caracciolo. I'm a consultant and a trainer and one of the owner of Scuola di Fundraising di Roma, which is a training and consultancy body. Let me say that I'm really happy to be here today to introduce and to offer you this webinar, which is presented by the King Baudin Foundation United States and by Scuola di Fundraising di Roma, and we have a special guest speaker. She will be introduced by Elena Fortinatos, Deputy Director of the King Baudin Foundation. Let me say that I'm really happy to present you this webinar today, and it might seem that the interest about this topic is very high, since we had more than 500 registrations to the webinar, and so we are delighted to have this this opportunity today that has been given to us also by the King Baudin Foundation United States. Let me pass on the word to Elena Fortinatos, Deputy Director of the King Baudin Foundation United States, and we will speak later while we have the Q&A, the question and answers moment. So please feel free also to write down in the Q&A button in the plugin of Zoom your questions, and we will then choose some of those because we won't have an infinite time, obviously. So we will choose one of those to be asked, and so please feel free to make your questions through this feature. So please welcome Elena Fortinatos.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks, everybody. Hi and welcome. As Andrea said, my name is Elena Fortinatos. I'm the Deputy Director of the King Baudin Foundation United States. It's great to be here. Thank you all so much for joining today. There are some familiar names on the attendee list, but for those who aren't familiar with KBF US, please allow me a very brief word. The King Baudin Foundation facilitates thoughtful, effective giving to Europe and Africa. We enable US donors to support their favorite causes overseas. We also provide European and African nonprofits with cost-effective solutions to raise funds in the US through a tool we call an American Friends Fund. We have over 500 American Friends Funds, including with institutions like the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands, the Bavarian State Opera in Germany, the National Library of France, among others. These funds save nonprofits the trouble and expense of creating their own public charity in the U.S. KBF US handles all back office administration, including tax receipts and donor support. So if you have donors in the US, feel free to reach out to me and we'd be happy to assist. And by the way, if you have donors in Canada, in Europe, or in Asia, feel free to reach out to me as well, as we have partners that can help you with these donors in those countries and regions. Now, a couple housekeeping points before I introduce our esteemed speaker. You're all in listen-only mode, which you've probably figured out already. This session is being recorded. As Andrea said, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom, not the chat feature. It's a different feature. If you scroll your mouse over the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see that. And we are joined by people in a few different countries. So like Andrea said, for English, stay on the English channel. There might be a bit of a delay when we switch languages after Corey speaks. So just know that there is going to be a delay, but just hang tight and the language will work. And of course, like Andrea said, for Italian, please use the French channel. If you're French, then stick to the English channel. I know that can be a little confusing. So with pleasure, please let me introduce our speaker, Ms. Coralie Toevs. Corey is the Assistant General Manager for Development at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. She originally joined the Met as Director of Annual Giving. She's the former Director of Development for the New York Philharmonic and Manager of Membership and Special Events at the Brooklyn Museum. She began her fundraising career in Eugene, Oregon, as Assistant Director of the Oregon Bach Festival and Director of Development for the Eugene Symphony. Corey, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to hear you speak.
Thank you very much, Elena. And I'm delighted and I'm overwhelmed that there are so many people on this webinar. Thank you so much for tuning in. And Joe, I know you're doing translation. If I am going too fast, let me know. So first, just a little bit of history about my current organization, the Metropolitan Opera, a wonderful opera company founded in 1883. We are a repertory house, which means we do 7 performances a week, which is Monday through Saturday, plus a matinee on Saturday, or sometimes a matinee on Sunday. Each night is a different opera. We do 22 to 25 different operas a season, of which 6 or 7 are new productions, and the rest are what we call revivals of old productions. It's a very large opera house. It has 4,000 seats. We have a full-time orchestra and chorus, about 3,000 employees, scenic shops, costume shops, electrical shops, wig shops, all of that stuff. It's all built on the premises. We also have a very long live radio broadcast on Saturday matinees. And we more recently, under Peter Gelb, have started to broadcast or transmit in high definition our operas into movie theaters around the world. And we do that 10 times a year. And we've been doing that since about 2006. And it enabled us under COVID to show operas free every night for the 18 months that we were closed. It was really amazing. So before I get into the nuts and bolts of how to organize a major fundraising program, I want to acknowledge that the American model of fundraising is built on a long, old tradition of philanthropy with very, very little government support. And I know that European organizations have huge amounts of government support. And the reason that fundraising is becoming interesting to you is because your governments are not as generous as they used to be. And our government was never generous to begin with. The Metropolitan Opera's budget every year is $300 million. And of that, only $300,000 is from government support, less than 1%. The United States has always had fundraising because we've never had governments that have been willing to give us any money. So we as citizens must give money for things like cultural programs, hospitals, education institutions, social services, parks, recreation. All of that is charity in the United States. But that said, I know from my friends in Europe that it is possible to build a fundraising program, but it does take time. And my example, which is a King Baudouin organization, the Bayerische Staatsoper in Munich, which has 100 million or probably more, 100 million euro budget. They had no fundraising at the beginning of the 2000s, and now they're raising 5 or 6 or maybe even more million euros a year. So it is possible to do. You must be patient, and you also have to have a very well organized program. So what does that mean? The first thing to keep in mind is 10% of the donors will give you 90% of the dollars. So focus on your most important people. When you're building a program, don't try to do a direct mail and get $10 from everybody. Go to a certain number of people and ask for reasonably large gifts, because that is where you're going to have the best luck. That said, to build a successful major gifts program starts with a well-structured giving ladder with clear benefits, privileges, recognition, and things, programs to support. In the case of most American organizations, the most important thing, because it is the easiest for the institution, is unrestricted membership dollars. You give money for nothing in particular, just for the great benefit of the institution. It is the organization may use it for whatever they want. And what do you get out of it as a donor? You get lots of fun things. You get your name in the program book. You get ticket priority. And we'll get into that a little bit later about all the wonderful benefits that you can offer your donors. But you also have to provide them with what their money is going for. So if it's unrestricted, it's going for whatever the institution wants. It can also go, though, because people being people, sometimes they don't want to make it for unrestricted purposes. They want it for a special program. So what are your special programs? Make a list. Do you have young artists or young ballet dancers? Are you training children? Are you training young adults? Are you training senior citizens? Are you doing media programs? Do you have new productions or exhibitions at art museums or special kinds of programs on the radio? Make a list of all those things. What are your capital needs? You have buildings. Most everybody has buildings. Buildings fall down. You have to fix them up. How do you package that cost of fixing up a building so that it's attractive to donors? And finally, do you have an endowment? I think most of you know what an endowment is. Most large organizations have them because over time people have given them money to create an endowment. An endowment is a fund of money invested with a bank or an investment company. And the organization can only spend a small percentage of what the fund earns. So for example, the Met's endowment is about 400 million, and we are only allowed to spend 5% of it every year. And that's a policy set by our board of directors. So the next thing to think about is, why do your donors give? What motivates them? There are, as I mentioned, the specific benefits and privileges that they like to get. Ticket priority, their name in the program. They like to be invited to parties. They want to go to lectures. They want to learn things. They want an inside event with either an artist or a doctor or somebody who's important. Business people want to do business connections. They like to do client entertaining. They like to be able to meet new people that they can sell their things to. Other people want to just socialize. They want to meet fun people. They want to meet artists. They want to come to fancy parties and get dressed up. But there are two other reasons that people give, and these are really important. Institutional need, and that is exceptionally important. So you always have to be explaining why you need the money. What is it that is needed for at your institution? And they want to please you. You are all solicitors. And we'll talk about this role of a staff solicitor a little later, but you can never underestimate the personal connection. There are three things that must be in place for a successful fundraising ask to happen. And these are things about a person, let's call it characteristics of people. One, are they rich? They don't have to be super rich, but they can't be poverty stricken either. They have to have the means, we call that the means, i.e. money in the bank. They also have to have the inclination. They must want to give to your organization. But even those two things are not enough. The third thing is opportunity, and you control the opportunity. Opportunity is someone must ask them for a gift. I sometimes have naive board members who say, oh, Corey, the Metropolitan Opera is so wonderful. People will just rain money on you from out of the sky. That is not true. You must provide people with an opportunity to give. And the opportunity and the actual asking of money is 1% of the process of fundraising. 99% of the process of fundraising is educating your donors, making friends with them, acclimating them to your giving rules, your giving culture. You are setting up a culture within your institution that rewards people for giving you money. And it's a lot of fun. I've loved my career. I've been doing it for decades, and it really is so rewarding. So let's get to staff structure and management. And I run a very large organization, but I've also run very small organizations. My first job, it was me and a secretary. And the same things are true at a small organization and a big organization. If you are only raising a small amount of money, you don't need so many staff people. If you're raising a large amount of money, you need more than one staff person doing each type of job. And the types of jobs are solicitors, technical staff, which is research and database management, and support staff, who are people who answer the phone, who update the database, who take care of donors, greet them at events, show them around your institution. And you need some of each of those. If you're a small organization, you may only need one of each of those. If you're a big organization like we are, I have a staff of 42, and I have several people in many people in each of those areas. You also need volunteers. And I know that is a little quite different from Europe. In the United States, we have boards of directors, and they are by law responsible for running the institution and for providing money for the institution. If the organization fails, it's their fault. It's not my fault. We don't, of course, talk about it in quite those direct way, but in fact, that is what they do. What they do not do in the United States is have any authority or duties in charge or in conjunction with artistic things. They do not plan the operas. They don't tell Peter Gelb who to hire as singers. That is not their area. They meet, in our case, 6 times a year, and some of them, not all of them, help with fundraising. They also hire the general manager and the music director, and they serve as the public face of the institution. So they are responsible for knowing about the institution. when they help with fundraising, not all of them like to do fundraising. In fact, I would say few of them like to do anything about fundraising. And the reason that is they know that if they ask a friend of theirs to give money, their friend will ask them to support the friend's institution. And no one wants to be in that position. Excuse me. So the people who are willing to do it generally have a title, and it gives them a reason not to have to give to other people's organizations, because they have claimed the Metropolitan Opera as their organization, and they are then asking mostly strangers to support the organization. So how do you identify and cultivate your donors? The only way to do that is to meet them. You have to get to know them. You have to be friends with them. You are the connection between them and the institution. And you are always thinking in the back of your mind, who are they? What do they like to do? What kind of programs do we have that they would like to fund? And how can I get more money from them next year than I got this year? You're always thinking about how to upgrade them. You don't say that to them, but you're sort of showing them a wonderful world that they can be more active in and have a more enjoyable time participating in your events. The other two important things are having a research person and someone who is good at technology, who can maintain a database. You have to have a database. There are a lot of different kinds of computer programs that exist around this kind of fundraising. You keep track of their name and their address and when they last visited you, and did they buy tickets, and did they come to events, and who do they know, and did they complain about something in the past? Did they compliment you about something? The more you can have information about your donors, the better it is for getting them to increase in the future. And finally, before I get to some questions and answers, I know you will have questions and answers, I want to say a few words about how to ask for money. That is something that terrifies people. And it's not very hard because it doesn't happen in person very often. And there are many ways to do it. You can do it in person. You can send them a letter. You can send them an email. You can call them on the phone. You can have whole groups of people who work on this in different ways. And you need to have reasons for them to give, reasons that are emotional as well as benefits related. So you are tying them to something they love, which is why the people who love you the most will give you probably the largest gifts, and certainly more than they're maybe capable of, or more than you think they are capable of, which gets back to means, inclination, and opportunity. Someone who is moderately wealthy, but hugely adoring of your organization will give you percentage-wise a larger gift than a person who is phenomenally wealthy but doesn't feel a great connection to your institution. So sometimes people will make a big gift because they feel like they should have their name on the list, but they don't really want to have to come to the opera, or they do it once for a special project that they think is important, like a capital project, and then they go away and they disappear for a while. But mostly you will have a regular group of people, and every year you ask them for money. And you don't just ask them once a year. Once a year is your unrestricted membership gifts that give you the basic privileges of name in the program book, VIP access for tickets, or if you're a museum, entry and free entry into the museum. You have to figure out what applies to your institution, but I'm sure you will be aware of that because you know your institutions much better than I do. So you have to figure out who they are, why they like you, what you have that they want, and how often can you ask them. And usually for the first time, you'll just ask them once. So you ask them in January. Then you wait until the following January, unless over the course of January to July, you meet with them and you realize that they really like your young artist program. And then you ask them right then and there. If they are expressing the least bit of enthusiasm for anything, make sure they understand that there is an opportunity to support that program. But it does not take the place of unrestricted support, especially for your board, your closest in people. That you will not survive just on special project fundraising alone. You'll realize as you get to know people what the best time is to ask them, and you really have to get to know them, and it really does pay off in the end. So I think that's sort of the basic lessons that I have to share. And I know that there probably are questions. So if there are, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, Corey, thank you. Okay, here. Well, Corey, thank you so much. And we have already some questions flowing in. So I will start with the first, which is has been asked by Madeleine Mobach-Neal. What kind of information on your donors, complaints, what they appreciated in the past, and so on? Would you register in would you register in a CRM system? And yes, we have different legislation in the US and in Europe when it comes to personal data and integrity. Or if you don't use a customer relationship management system for this kind of information, how do you build organizational knowledge and your donors?
We, the Metropolitan Opera created a fundraising management system, and it has a customer relations management part to it. It's called Tessitura. Tessitura, those of you who know opera know that Tessitura means whether you have a high voice or a low voice and the range that you sing in. And in our case, it was created, decades ago. I was part of the group that created it. And it combined the functionality of ticket sales and fundraising contributions. So I can open the screen and it has 25 different tabs in it. And it keeps track of the contributions, it keeps track of the ticket sales. And in terms of privacy issues, yes, our privacy issues are, we cannot send people things without their permission. But when they join a membership program, there is a piece of paper with very tiny writing that outlines the whole legal strictures having to do with fundraising in the state of New York. And the assumption is when they give you the money, they are also giving you the permission based on the laws of the state of New York. It makes it difficult for us to solicit in Europe if people do not give us permission to solicit them. But when people volunteer a gift, which is why you always have to have a lot of places on your website to make gifts, when they volunteer a gift, they are giving you permission to ask for another gift. And in terms of, do we keep track of complaints? If someone complains that they don't like new operas, we will write that down, and that is not considered private information. That's just considered their personal opinion. And it helps us because then we know not to invite them to contemporary operas because they won't come. So they also complain about small things that we can fix, like where their name is misspelled in the program book. So the range of complaints tend to be very personal to each individual. And we do keep track of it, mostly to know that we've fixed the problem. So our customer relations has a way of entering the complaint, and then it stays open until we solve the complaint. I hope that answers your question.
I think definitely yes, Corey, thank you. And we have lots of other questions, so I will jump right into them. So another question that has been put by a good friend and colleague, Marianna Martinoni, one of the first cultural fundraisers in Italy. So she opened up the way for lots of cultural fundraisers in Italy. How many new donors did you gain in this pandemic time? How did you manage the one-to-one relationship with your donors in these two years?
Oh, very good question. The first, thousands and thousands of new donors. We had 30,000 new donors, and they were primarily because we were showing opera on our website for free, and millions of people tuned in around the world, and they gave money all on their own without, our even having, well, we had to ask, but we asked just by showing on the screen either a number you could text your credit card to, or telling them to go to the website and fill out the form on the website. And it was really amazing to us that this happened. We started the year with, and it was particularly amazing in terms of European, donors outside the United States. We knew that we had people who watched our HD transmissions in the movie theaters, but because movie theaters do not collect names and addresses, we had no idea who they were. When we went dark and shut down because of the pandemic, and we went on to our websites every night with a plea and a free opera, thousands of people gave us money who were not even in our database. We started the year before COVID with 2,000 donors from outside the United States. We ended the year with 6,000. So we gained 4,000 new donors, mostly very small gifts, but a few fairly large gifts. And this is where our research comes in. Of those 4,000 new international donors, we found many of them in our database, but without any information. But we now had we had their names and addresses. We could research them. We discovered that a very small percentage of them were very wealthy. We found a woman from Japan who was married to one of the wealthiest men in Japan. And it turns out she came to the Met once a year, had been coming, but because we didn't know anything about her, and we can't cultivate every person who buys a ticket in a 4,000-seat opera house, she had just come quietly and come once a year. And it was always in the fall. And our guess is her husband was coming to the UN for some reason in the fall, and she went to the opera without him. So that was extremely helpful. And how did we cultivate them? We didn't. It was really difficult. But all we could do was call them on the phone. So I have a research staff. Once a month, we would review the bios of people who had given $1,000 or more and assign them to my staff. And I said, call them on the phone and thank them. But that's all we could do. We couldn't invite them. Normally, when we cultivate high-end gifts, we have a restaurant in the opera house. We invite people to dinner before the restaurant. They sit in a box with us, and we have room for 8. So we have 3 couples. They love that. They love getting treated to a free night at the opera. We can take them backstage to meet artists. We couldn't do any of that. All we could do was send them emails and thank them, and call them on the phone and thank them. So we now that we're back, have a huge list of people that we do want to cultivate in person.
Great, thank you, Cory. We have lots of other questions, so I will have to select some of those. Another question that has been made by Valeria Romanelli regards the different roles of the different offices inside of an organization. So how do the board, the those who write the cultural projects, the actual actors and the performers, and the communication. How do they have to cooperate in a fundraising activity and in a fundraising strategy?
That is also an excellent question. In the case of our organization, we ask artists to perform in small settings, but we don't ask artists to do fundraising, except for our music director, Yannick Nézet-Séguin. And occasionally we will ask him to make connections with a donor he might know. And he, for example, we had a lovely man who was living in Philadelphia and had been involved with the Philadelphia Orchestra, where Yannick is the music director. So we knew that Yannick knew him, and we asked him if he would meet with this person about a project, but I was there as well. Mostly the way we use the board is we don't use the entire board. We use the people who are willing to work on it, and they each then are assigned a portfolio of donors. So all of my, I call them solicitors, soliciting staff, have a portfolio of 100 to 200 donors they must solicit every year. Then board members also have a portfolio of donors, and they are staffed by a member of my staff. So I will have for example, my major gifts director, she has her own 100 to 200 donors she deals with. Then she writes letters, sends emails, organizing cultivation evenings for our board president. And I have another one who organizes the same things for the chairman of our major gifts program. So each of the 5 or 6 volunteers and board members have an assigned staff member to help them, to be their secretary, to organize their tickets, to extend the invitations for the cultivation events. Then we have a whole special events staff who run the parties. They organize parties, and they make sure people buy. If some parties require a ticket and some parties are free. And if they're free, it's because you made a gift to the annual membership program. So those people just organize the parties. We have one person who only does our VIP tickets, and all he does is we set aside a certain number of the best seats in the house, and to get them, you have to be giving a certain amount of money, and you get to talk to Joe Vallone, who we call our concierge. We use the word concierge because it's a very good word. It means somebody who helps you. People know what concierges are from hotels. Well, we have one at the Metropolitan Opera. And Joe, our concierge, can get you not only opera tickets at the Metropolitan Opera, he can get you opera tickets at La Scala or at the Berlin Opera or at Covent Garden. So we try and provide a lot of high-end services, and that's a staff function.
Well, this is, I think some of the fundraisers who are listening today and some of the directors will envy your your organization and the massive amount of team members you have actually in your team. But I think it's very significant and gives lots of answers also to probably some ideas that people have in the beginning, because lots of people think probably that in the US people are richer and they give just because they're richer, and instead it's just that obviously there's a great teamwork behind such results.
And also I do want to say, for smaller organizations, because I have worked at very, very small organizations and I've worked at medium-sized organizations. At small organizations, there are fewer donors. So each worker doesn't have 100 people. You may not even have 100 donors. So in that case, the richest donor, you will know because you know them, whether they should be taken care of by the executive director of the organization or by a staff person or by a fellow donor. It is very organic the way relationships develop. They start small and aren't a lot of work. And you can tell pretty quickly whether a donor is going to develop into a big donor and require a lot of attention, or whether they can stay a small donor and you can keep them in your portfolio because they know your name, but you don't really have to do much with them. They just buy their tickets on their own and they're self-sufficient, and they don't give you enough money for you to worry about it. So it's you as the fundraiser have to be able to prioritize your work and have this psychological instincts to know who to assign to which donor of importance.
Very interesting. A couple of last quick questions. One is more a curiosity. Well, it's a question curiosity, let's put it like that. It's been written by Viviana Giovannozzi, and she's asking, what was there ever a time you got some money or a gift that actually you didn't expect at all? And what did you learn from that experience that you can share with us?
Oh, that's okay. Every now and then you get, yeah, okay, here's a very good example, and it's something I'm wrestling with. Peter Gelb, my general manager, got a phone call 2 years ago from a woman in Boston, very wealthy woman, who was not in our database. And so she didn't seem to have much interest in opera. She was the board chairman of the Boston Symphony, and she was in the process of hiring a new music director. And so she wanted advice from important people in the classical music industry. And mostly she went to the general manager or the executive directors and presidents of the New York Philharmonic or the Chicago Symphony or the San Francisco Symphony, but she also wanted to go to the Metropolitan Opera. So she asked Peter for a meeting and he said yes. And he gave her a lot of advice, and she sent $100,000 as a thank you present. That we never would have asked her. I'm not quite sure what to do with her right now, because I know she doesn't like opera, and we couldn't cultivate her because she gave us the $100,000 shortly before we shut down for COVID. So normally I would be asking this woman a year later for another $100,000, but I knew that was probably not doable. Then, by coincidence, Peter Gelb and his wife were having dinner outside at a local restaurant. And the woman comes to his table and says, "I'm Mrs. So-and-so, and we've never met. We've only talked to each other on the phone. And I recognize your face." And he said, "Well, how nice to meet you. Thank you." And then I told him, okay, now you have to call her up and invite her to the opera. So that's my job, is to tell him what he needs to do. And he is going to do that. Another time it happened, and this is a more positive story, is when the Metropolitan Opera lost its funding for the radio broadcast. We were on the radio from 1935 to 2000, about 2000. And Texaco, the great, wonderful Texaco oil company, gave $7 million a year, all those years, to fund the radio broadcast, because that's what they cost. Then Texaco went bankrupt. They've merged with Chevron, and Chevron said, "You have 1 year and we're going to pull the plug. No more $7 million a year." Beverly Sills was the board chairman at the time. She organized a huge on-air fundraising campaign. She went all over the country raising money, and she was sitting in a restaurant across from Lincoln Center giving a fundraising speech to a likely donor. And the woman at the table next to her walked up afterwards and said, "My name is Mary Sue Smith, and my boss has a foundation, and I think we could help you out." And this was a foundation that had never given money to the Met. Turns out it was a person who had listened on the radio. He gave $1 million, and we were able to go to him, not every year, but for very special reasons, including under COVID, he gave us another $500,000. So that fell into when money really does fall out of the sky into your lap, then you have to pay attention right away to be nice to them and try and figure out whether it's renewable, whether you can do it again. And if it isn't, never forget about them, because you never know when they might reappear in your life.
Another question that has been raised by Francesca Quaratino regards small donations. You started your speech by sharing the fact that 90% of the resources is given by 10% of your donors. So you said it's very important to focus on those, but I know for sure that you value also small donations, since, well, you got into in the Met also as director of annual giving, so you worked also on a planned continuous donations. So how do you evaluate these small donations? Is it something that also a major institution should get into and start to do, even if it's such a big of a work and it brings less amount of money?
Well, there are two reasons why it can be valuable to have a group of small donors. One is a certain number of them will become bigger donors, and the only way you'll know is to solicit them over time and see who upgrades, which is why it's so important to have a giving program with a lot of steps. You want to climb that giving ladder, and a lot of people start at the lowest level. So therefore, yes, it's valuable to ask for small gifts, but don't make all of your good privileges down at the lowest level. Or if you do, change your privileges 5 years later to make it more expensive for people to keep the privileges. You've got to keep, keeping a low amount, but moving the good privileges up to a middle amount. So for example, if you start and you say everybody can have their name in the program book for $100, 2 years later, you're going to have to make it $200, because you won't have enough room in your program book to list every single person. And people will, to keep their name in the program book, give you more money over time. You also have a database and you can see the trends. So I can ask my data person to say, give me everybody who increased their gift by $200 last year. And then those people are more important than the people who didn't increase their gifts. So it is a way of evaluating who's going to, move themselves up without much help from you. The other reason to have small donations is, interestingly enough, those people who give you $200 every year for decades, they will die and leave you millions of dollars. And that is called planned giving. You have to tell them you have a planned giving group. We have what's called the Encore Society. Ha ha ha. The best name, I have to say, for a planned giving group that I know of is the New York Botanical Garden. And their planned giving group is called the Perennial Society, i.e., you will live forever if you leave money in your will to the New York Botanical Garden. Ours is the Encore Society, and we do special programs for them, just the way we do for our regular membership donors. Some of them are membership donors, and often they are very low-level donors, but they have written their will and left either a small or a large amount to the Met. And in the past 2 years, every year we have gotten a multi-million-dollar grant from a $200 planned giving member. And that is rather breathtaking. And sometimes they tell you they're leaving you all their money. Mostly they don't tell you much at all. They just say you're in my will. And then every now and then Peter Gelb will say, well, so when is Mrs. So-and-so going to die? And I say, Peter, you cannot ask that question. That is, how can I answer that question? So but it is worthwhile, and it is often, that's, another reason to have small gifts.
Mm-hmm. It's nice to hear that somebody can offer also perennial living and not only the church, which is something that already has been done from years in Italy. So, well, thank you so much, Cory. I would have tons of questions still in the chat, and even by myself and from other colleagues who are writing me directly on my WhatsApp, trying to jump the queue. But I think we're almost done with your time, so I will give the word to Elena, and I hope we will have another time maybe to continue with some of the questions. Maybe we can share them with you, and if you have something that you want to share with the participants, we will happy to transmit it then afterwards to them. So thank you so much.
Andrea, you're very welcome, and please feel free to share my email address with everyone. I'm happy to respond to questions via email. And if anyone comes to New York at some point in the future, I'd be delighted to see you and give you a tour of the Met and offer you some tickets to the opera. Wow,
this is some great offer and very dangerous. You know that fundraisers know how to ask. So I will filter the request for your email, but I will share it for sure. So thank you again.
You're very welcome.
And just to pipe in and thank Cory again on behalf of the King Baudouin Foundation, thank you so much. And to all our folks that are staying, of course, please just stay on the language channel that you're on, and you're going to notice a brief switch. Andrea, if you would be so kind to introduce Massimo.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I'm happy to introduce Massimo Coencagli. Massimo Coencagli is the scientific director and one of the owners as well of Scuola di Fundraising di Roma. He's one of my mentors, which doesn't say enough, doesn't say much, but still I have to say it. And I'm happy to give him the word. He will try to bring some of the things that have been shared by Cory into an Italian perspective and how we can use and apply them in the Italian environment. So welcome, Massimo.
Massimo, benvenuto.
Grazie mille. Vorrei innanzitutto ringraziare di tutto cuore il King Baudouin Foundation USA per aver organizzato insieme alla Scuola di Fundraising di Roma questo webinar, ringraziare i tanti partecipanti che credo testimoniano il bisogno e anche l'interesse di approfondire le tante dimensioni del fundraising culturale, e in particolare davvero vorrei ringraziare di cuore Cory per il suo intervento, che ritengo per molti versi illuminante. Innanzitutto perché ci ha fornito uno spaccato estremamente concreto di come si lavora in un'organizzazione, non solo nella stanza del fundraising per così dire, e come si lavora per le donazioni e per le grandi donazioni, ma direi in generale anche per stringere rapporti solidi, duraturi con i sostenitori di un'istituzione culturale, che è la vera azione strategica per il fundraising. Devo dire che in Italia si fa ancora fatica a capire che il fundraising non è solo una funzione tecnica, operativa di un'istituzione, ma è una funzione strategica che ha lo stesso peso che ha la missione di una organizzazione, e in quanto tale non può essere una funzione, non può che essere una funzione trasversale a tutte le altre funzioni di un'organizzazione, così come lo è il raggiungimento della mission di un'organizzazione, dalle pubbliche relazioni alla progettazione, alla direzione culturale, alla comunicazione e chiaramente anche a livello direttivo dei consigli di amministrazione. Io penso che questo sia un passaggio fondamentale, perché se da un lato tutto il nostro mondo culturale, intendo parlare delle istituzioni culturali e delle organizzazioni culturali italiane, afferma che c'è bisogno di un maggiore impegno dei privati in cultura da parte delle aziende, degli individui, delle fondazioni, essendo peraltro la cultura uno degli asset principali dello sviluppo del nostro paese, e dall'altro lato dobbiamo prendere atto che si investe ancora poco nel rafforzare le organizzazioni nelle capacità e nelle competenze di fundraising. E questo è un discorso che vale non solo per coloro che dovrebbero in ogni organizzazione presidiare professionalmente, tecnicamente le attività di raccolta fondi, ma anche e soprattutto per i gruppi dirigenti. E quindi anche e soprattutto un problema di cultura organizzativa dei gruppi dirigenti, una cultura che credo negli Stati Uniti sia piuttosto diffusa, sicuramente non senza problematiche e criticità, credo che insomma siano come sempre da risolvere strada facendo. Sicuramente questo è vero anche per ragioni storiche e per un modello di welfare, come ha spiegato Cori all'inizio, che a differenza del nostro modello riconosce un ruolo fondamentale alla filantropia. Ma io penso che questo non vuol dire che nel contesto italiano non si possa fare altrettanto, puntando anche e soprattutto sulla formazione al fundraising dei gruppi dirigenti e investendo su un adeguamento delle strumentazioni, come ad esempio database o sistemi di knowledge management, di conoscenza, di controllo delle conoscenze sui pubblici, sugli interlocutori, sui donatori. Insomma, investire in quella funzione di ricerca e sviluppo anche nel settore del fundraising, senza la quale obiettivamente la sostenibilità nel lungo termine potrebbe sembrare messa in discussione. In secondo luogo, credo che l'intervento di Cori ci aiuti a comprendere quanto il successo del fundraising non sia legato tanto solo a condizioni favorevoli per i donatori sotto il profilo fiscale, dei vantaggi fiscali e contributivi, o alla presenza di un alto numero di ricchi. Spesso noi italiani, ma credo non solo noi italiani, abbiamo una visione un po' infantile del fundraising statunitense, di un ambiente un po' dorato, fatto di persone ricche e di grandi agevolazioni fiscali, il che è vero. Ma più che altro il successo del fundraising è legato alla capacità delle organizzazioni di costruire delle relazioni di interesse e di coinvolgere le realtà della società civile a tutti i livelli, dalle aziende alla comunità locale e quant'altro, nella quella che chiamerei una governance di un'organizzazione culturale, quindi non nel governo in senso tecnico che attiene a delle figure specifiche, ma quel processo, no, che porta ad occuparsi con responsabilità della cultura in quanto bene comune. Attenzione, i grandi donatori ci sono anche in Italia, anzi ci sono in tutto il mondo, e grazie al cielo l'Italia ha un'offerta culturale che interessa a tutto il mondo. Il fatto è che noi siamo ancora complessivamente inadeguati nel pensare un ruolo attivo dei donatori nelle nostre realtà culturali. Certo, operare in un ambiente favorevole sotto il profilo sociale, tecnologico, giuridico, fiscale, come indubbiamente quello statunitense, è sicuramente una condizione per il successo del fundraising. E da questo punto di vista dobbiamo fare ancora tanto nel nostro paese per eliminare una serie di ostacoli culturali, sociali, amministrativi, burocratici che si frappongono allo sviluppo del fundraising, che rendono difficile non solo chiedere soldi, ma anche donare soldi, a volte paradossalmente. Al contempo però dobbiamo anche prendere atto con piacere che il fundraising culturale sta crescendo in Italia, sia sul versante delle organizzazioni, sia sul versante dei donatori, e questo fa emergere anche delle buone prassi che però io credo andrebbero messe a sistema, rese non fatti episodici per quanto positivi, ma una prassi consolidata e diffusa, anche per non disperdere un grande patrimonio del nostro paese, ossia il fatto che le comunità, la società civile italiana da sempre ha investito in cultura, cultura materiale e cultura immateriale, per garantirsi poi che cosa? Garantirsi un elevato stato di benessere sociale, anche personale, e questo io credo che sia un fenomeno che ci viene invidiato in tutto il mondo. Forse non tutti voi sapete che gli italiani hanno una forte propensione a sostenere la cultura, che se ne dica. Si stima da una recente ricognizione realizzata da alcuni nostri colleghi di Cultural Philanthropy, che ha preso in considerazione il fundraising culturale in più paesi europei, che il 40% della popolazione italiana è propensa a donare per la cultura, chiaramente, con una media di 80 euro l'anno. Tenete conto che, ad esempio, nel Regno Unito, dove sicuramente il fundraising è più avanzato e anche la cultura della donazione è più avanzata, le persone orientate a donare per la cultura sono il 20% e con una media di donazione annua di 36 euro. Stiamo parlando di propensione, però, attenzione, che non potrà tramutarsi in un comportamento se noi non miglioriamo il fundraising culturale a livello delle organizzazioni e a livello delle policy pubbliche e private sulla cultura. Ed è per questo che la scuola di fundraising di Roma ha deciso di dedicare alla sfida di far crescere il fundraising culturale in Italia un evento importante che è giunto alla seconda edizione, di cui, concludendo, vorrei presentarvi per invitare tutti a partecipare. Un itinerario che è chiamato Più fundraising, più cultura, di cui peraltro questo webinar rappresenta la prima tappa di avvicinamento. Se mi permettete, vorrei usare qualche slide per appunto mettervi a parte di questo evento. Un attimo di pazienza. Chiedo conferma che effettivamente si vedano. Ecco, l'evento si terrà, l'evento principale, finale, si terrà dal 13 al 16 dicembre 2021. Qui potete vedere i partner che ad oggi, i partner e gli sponsor che ad oggi stanno sostenendo e stanno organizzando con noi questo evento, e che si compone di due marce di avvicinamento, due incontri su temi specifici. Il primo si è tenuto oggi, il prossimo si terrà il 24 novembre, sempre online, e sarà dedicato ad approfondire l'evoluzione del mecenatismo in Italia e in Europa insieme ad Elisa Bortoluzzi-Dubac, che è esperta di filantropia e mecenatismo, Paolo Cuccia, che è presidente di Art Tribune, e Carola Carazzone, che oltre a essere direttore di Assifero, che è l'associazione delle fondazioni di erogazione, è anche presidente della rete europea delle fondazioni Daphne, e che organizziamo in collaborazione, oltre che con Assifero, anche con Art Tribuna, che è un magazine italiano molto importante che si occupa di cultura. Per poi arrivare all'evento principale, che ha questo titolo: affrontare le nuove sfide del settore culturale, il fundraising come risposta immunitaria. In poche parole, questo evento non è un convegno, non è neanche una fiera del fundraising culturale, intende essere un luogo in cui i principali stakeholder pubblici e privati della cultura mettano insieme la loro esperienza e le loro conoscenze per individuare poche ma concrete azioni che possano migliorare il fundraising culturale in Italia, eliminando ostacoli, cogliendo invece dalle buone prassi dei fattori di facilitazione da mettere a sistema. E quindi noi abbiamo organizzato questo evento un po' come se fossero, lo dico tra virgolette, gli stati generali del fundraising della cultura, con una sessione introduttiva in cui mettere a parte di questo lavoro i diversi interlocutori, dei tavoli di lavoro in cui questi interlocutori diciamo, si impegnino a trovare, concordare diciamo, alcune indicazioni operative da restituire in una sessione conclusiva appunto alle istituzioni pubbliche, private, alle fondazioni e quanti altri possono concorrere a far crescere il fundraising. Quindi diciamo è l'occasione per una elaborazione partecipata di una policy per far crescere il fundraising culturale in Italia. Questi sono i temi che noi abbiamo isolato per altrettanti 6 tavoli di lavoro che verranno coordinati da persone che proprio per il loro ruolo, le loro responsabilità sono al centro delle dinamiche che noi vogliamo indagare, e che accompagnati da fundraiser attivi nel mondo della cultura facciano questo lavoro e lo restituiscano appunto in una sessione plenaria finale. Come partecipare a questo evento? Noi stiamo ricevendo tantissime adesioni da parte di istituzioni nazionali, ma anche amministrazioni locali, organizzazioni e istituzioni culturali di vario genere. E quindi lo vogliamo costruire insieme con tutti gli stakeholder. Che cosa si può fare? Informarsi sull'evolversi del programma, diventare, se si vuole, partner del progetto e collaborare con noi a costruirlo, segnalare l'interesse a partecipare, chiaramente, perché no, diffondere la notizia. Da oggi è online aggiornato il sito www.fundraisingperlacultura.it che contiene il programma di cui vi ho messo brevemente a parte e che appunto di giorno in giorno verrà aggiornato sia nei partecipanti sia nei temi e quant'altro. È chiaro che però noi non possiamo fare solo questo e dobbiamo innanzitutto, proprio in quanto scuola di fundraising di Roma, impegnarci diciamo per offrire formazione a coloro i quali nelle istituzioni e nelle organizzazioni culturali intendono sul serio investire sul fundraising. E quindi abbiamo già alcuni corsi in atto che se sono di vostro interesse potete approfondire sul nostro sito scuolafundraising.it, uno dedicato al FUS, al Fondo Unico per lo Spettacolo, in modo che tutte le organizzazioni abbiano contezza di che cosa vuol dire il FUS e come ci si può accedere. Veramente su questo corso abbiamo pochissimi posti disponibili e si svolge il 18 e il 25 ottobre. E poi il nostro storico, arrivato alla 4ª edizione, Fundraising per la cultura, un corso base che cerca di dare una panoramica completa di che cosa sia il fundraising culturale e soprattutto come funziona all'interno di un'organizzazione. E questo mi permette in conclusione di ringraziare Patrimonio Cultura, che è partner non solo delle nostre attività formative, ma che è co-organizzatore insieme alla Scuola di Fundraising di Roma dell'evento Più Fundraising, Più Cultura. In buona sostanza noi abbiamo un sogno e credo che questo sogno lo condividiamo con molti dei partecipanti. Noi sogniamo che il 2022, anche nell'ottica del nostro processo di, come dire, ripresa e resilienza, intendo parlare del processo che è in atto in Italia come in altri paesi europei, che il 2022 sia l'anno di svolta per il fundraising culturale e lavoriamo, spero veramente con tutti voi, per trasformare questo sogno in realtà. Grazie mille.
Great. Thank you so much, Massimo. Grazie. And a big thank you to Scuola di Fundraising and Andrea. Thank you so much for your partnership and your help today. And a big thank you to Corey, who joined us from New York. She was fantastic. We're so happy that you got a chance to hear her and her insights. Just a note to say that the recordings will be made available after. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions about the King Baudouin Foundation. Andrea?
Beh, non resta che anche... well, sorry, I was on the English channel. I'm getting a little bit confused in which language I should speak. Well, first, let me thank you again, the King Baudouin Foundation United States, for this partnership. It's lovely to work together, and we're happy to offer you such a high-quality webinar, and I'm sure everybody will have enjoyed it. And please, as Massimo said, follow us on the channels to see what other webinars we are offering about our event. It's open to everybody. And well, I hope to see you soon on other channels. And thanks again to Cory for sharing her experience and her vision about cultural fundraising. And we will see you soon. Quindi arrivederci a tutti quanti. E ci vediamo presto, appunto. Grazie mille, un saluto dalla Scuola di Roma di Fundraising.